Sometimes the people who should stand by you are the first to walk away. Theodore Whitmore learned that on a gray Tuesday in October, standing beside a freshly turned grave in a borrowed black suit, while the rain found its way through the shoulders and down to the bone. He was 47 years old. He had just buried his wife. And the man across the grave from him, the man who had once raised a glass at his wedding and called him son, would not meet his eyes. Roland Ashby's face that day was carved from granite. His wife, Prudence, stood beside him in a wool coat the color of old blood. Her gloved hands folded so tight, the leather creaked. They had not spoken to Theo at the funeral home. They would not speak to him at the cemetery. And when the priest finished and the small crowd began to disperse under their black umbrellas, Roland turned to his granddaughter and said only this: "You can come home with us, Adelaide." But not him. Adelaide Whitmore was 24 years old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw, and a quiet steel in her that did not announce itself until it was already decided. She looked at her grandfather for a long moment across the wet grass. Then she walked to her father and slid her hand into his. "I'm going with him," she said. That was the moment Theo understood he had lost more than a wife. That was the moment the ground beneath his life began to give way. The next 60 days came down like a slow avalanche. Eleanor's medical bills arrived in waves, each envelope a small gravestone. The hospital, the oncologist, the hospice that had only had her for 9 days, 6 weeks. 6 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral. And somehow the paperwork weighed more than the woman it had failed to save. Then the bank moved. Foreclosure notices stapled to a door. Theo had painted himself the same door Eleanor had hung a Christmas wreath on every December for 23 years. By Thanksgiving, Theo and Adelaide were standing in their own driveway, watching sheriff's deputies supervise the loading of a U-Haul they could not afford. Theo had asked Roland for help. "Just temporary," he'd said. "A few weeks, until I find work, until I get back on my feet." Roland looked at him the way a man looks at something he stepped in. "I'm not going to enable the man who killed my daughter," he said. "Adelaide is welcome. You are not killed." That was the word. That was the word Roland used. Eleanor had been the one who waited. Eleanor had been the one who said it was probably nothing. Just stress. Just the change of seasons. Just a cough that wouldn't go. Theo had begged her to see a doctor. He had driven her to 2 appointments she canceled at the last minute because of work, because of Adelaide, because she was certain it was nothing. By the time the scans came back, the cancer had already crossed every border there was to cross. But grief doesn't need facts. Grief needs a culprit. And Roland Ashby had chosen his. Theo and Adelaide spent 2 weeks in a roadside motel off Route 22, eating gas station sandwiches and watching the savings drain like a tub with no plug. Theo applied for 47 jobs in 9 days. He heard back from 3. 2 were scams. The third wanted somebody 20 years younger. Then the lawyer called. "Mr. Whitmore?" The man said, his voice careful. "We have finally resolved the title on your grandfather's property. The house in Bedford County. It's yours, sir. It's been yours for some time, technically, but the paperwork was tangled. It's clear now." Theo gripped the motel phone hard enough to feel the plastic flecks. He had not thought about that house in 30 years. Cornelius Whitmore had died in 1995. Theo had been 17. He remembered the funeral the way a child remembers a thunderstorm in fragments in light and noise. He remembered a tall man with patient hands. A man who smelled like turpentine and cedar and old paper. A man who had taken him into the woods one summer and shown him how to read a maple tree by its bark, and who had said very quietly while they walked back to the house at dusk that the most important thing in this world was to know which things were worth protecting. Theo had not understood. He had been 7. Now he was 47. The motel ice machine groaned through the wall. Adelaide was asleep on the other bed, curled around a laptop she'd been using to take freelance design work for $15 an hour. The lawyer was still talking, asking if he wanted the keys mailed, or if he'd prefer to pick them up at the county office. "Mail them," Theo said. 2 days later, an envelope arrived with 3 keys on a brass ring and a note that said, "Only good luck." They drove out the next morning. The truck was a 2003 Ford that Theo had owned since Adelaide was in middle school, and it complained the whole way up the mountain. The road into Bedford County narrowed as they climbed. Asphalt gave way to gravel. Gravel gave way to a single-lane track lined with frostbitten goldenrod and the skeletons of summer's wildflowers. Adelaide rode with her forehead against the passenger window, watching the trees thin. "How long since anyone lived there, Dad?" 30 years, give or take. She did not answer for a while. "We're really going to live there. We're really going to try." The house appeared at the end of a long curve, half swallowed by ivy and thyme. Theo eased the truck onto the cracked driveway and stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The roof sagged in the middle like the spine of an old horse. 3 of the 4 front windows were boarded with plywood that had grayed and warped. Ivy had climbed the chimney and reached for the gutters. The porch steps had rotted through in places. The front door hung at an angle that suggested it had been forced once long ago and never set right since. A jay screamed from a dead tree near the woodshed. "Well," Adelaide said, "it's standing. That's something." Theo tried to smile. The muscles in his face had forgotten how. They unloaded what little they had. A duffel each. A box of kitchen things. A camp stove. 2 sleeping bags. Adelaide's laptop and her tablet, both insured against everything except the sound her father made when he thought she was asleep. The front door took both of them to open. It scraped across warped boards and let out a shriek that scattered birds from the roof. The smell hit them at once. 30 years of dust, damp wood, mildew. And underneath it all, something older and harder to name. The smell of a house that has been holding its breath. Adelaide turned on her phone flashlight. The beam moved through a living room frozen in another century. Furniture under stained sheets, their shapes ghostly and indistinct. Wallpaper hanging in long strips. A grandfather clock in the corner hand stopped at 4:17. On the mantel, a single photograph in a tarnished silver frame. Theo crossed the room and lifted it. Cornelius Whitmore, maybe 40 years old, standing on the front steps of this same house, with his arm around a woman in a sundress. Theo's grandmother, dead before he was born. They were both smiling. He set the picture back gently. The first night they slept on the living room floor with the lanterns burning down to coals. Adelaide fell asleep first. Theo lay on his back and watched a water stain on the ceiling and thought about Eleanor. He thought about the way she used to laugh at his jokes, even when they weren't funny, just to be kind. He thought about the way her hand had felt in his during the last week when she had stopped being able to speak. He thought about Roland Ashby's eyes at the funeral, and the word killed, and the way Adelaide had crossed that wet grass without hesitating. He thought, finally, of his grandfather, the patient hands, the cedar smell, the voice in the woods at dusk. Know which things are worth protecting. He fell asleep without meaning to. The next 2 weeks were a kind of triage. Theo was a software engineer by trade, but he had grown up under a father who had no patience for soft hands, and the old skills came back faster than he expected. He patched the worst of the roof with tarps and salvaged shingles. He pulled the plywood off the windows and replaced 4 of the panes with glass he found in a demolition yard outside Altoona for $40. He cleared the kitchen of mouse nests and rusted cans and ran a new line from the well pump that had, against all odds, still been functional. Adelaide handled the inside room by room with the methodical eye of a woman who had grown up watching her mother turn rented apartments into homes. She found a working outlet in the dining room and ran an extension cord like a lifeline. By the end of the first week, they had electricity in 3 rooms and a sink that ran cold. They did not have heat. They did not have hot water. They did not have a furnace anyone in their right mind would trust. But the November nights were not yet bitter, and Adelaide had brought an electric space heater from the motel that hummed beside their sleeping bags like a small, loyal animal. Theo did not allow himself to feel anything during those weeks. There was too much to do. The hospital had begun calling, then the collection agencies. He let the calls go to voicemail, and then he stopped checking the voicemail. Adelaide brought in money from her freelance work. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. But it kept them in cans of soup and gallons of milk and 20-pound bags of dog food for the stray that had taken up residence under the porch, and which Adelaide had named Augustus before Theo could think to object. He walked Augustus in the mornings. The dog was old and arthritic and seemed to understand grief in a way that humans did not. They walked the property line together. The dog and the man and Theo learned the shape of his inheritance, one fence post at a time. There were moments. He would not have called them peace. He would not have called them anything yet. But there were moments. Standing on the back porch with a cup of black coffee at 6 in the morning, watching the mist lift off the field, splitting a stove length of seasoned oak and feeling something in his shoulders unlock for the first time in a year. Adelaide laughing at something on her laptop in the next room. Her real laugh, the one she had not used since her mother got sick. Small things. Borrowed things. The kind of things a man learns to be grateful for only after he has lost the larger ones. It was on a Thursday in mid-November that he went down into the basement. He had been putting it off. The basement was the last circle of the house's hell. A low-ceilinged concrete pit that smelled of old water and forgotten things. There had been flooding at some point. The floorboards above the dirt floor were warped and rotten, and several had given way, entirely exposing the joists beneath. Adelaide had asked twice whether they should just seal it off. Theo had said no. He didn't know why. He just had a feeling the way you have a feeling about a card you're about to draw. He went down with a work light and a pry bar and a thermos of coffee that had gone lukewarm. The light buzzed when he plugged it in. The basement came up in pieces, concrete walls weeping moisture. A workbench against the far wall, its surface still scattered with the tools of a man who had not known he wouldn't be coming back. A coffee can full of bent nails. A vise furred with rust. And in the center of the floor, the worst of the rotted boards, soft as wet bread. Theo set down the thermos and got to work. The first 3 boards came up easy. The 4th resisted. He repositioned the bar, leaned his weight into it, and felt something deeper in the floor give way. The board snapped free. He stumbled back. When he raised the work light, he saw it. Beneath the rotted wood where dirt and joist should have been, there was metal. Dark iron pitted with rust, but unmistakably man-made. A square of it set flush with the foundation, 3 feet on a side. He knelt down. He brushed away decades of dust and grit with the flat of his hand. The square resolved, hinges along one edge, a recessed handle, and in the center, beneath a film of corrosion, a combination lock, a trapdoor. A locked trapdoor hidden under the basement floor of his grandfather's house. His heart did something it had not done in a long time. It moved. Adelaide. He didn't shout. He couldn't. His throat had gone dry. He climbed the basement stairs 2 at a time and found her in what had been Cornelius's study, sitting cross-legged on the floor with 3 open boxes of papers around her. "Come down here," he said. "You need to see this." She read his face before she heard the words. She set down the file in her lap and followed him. When she saw it, she said only, "Oh." They stood over it together for a long time. Adelaide finally crouched and ran her fingers along the seam where iron met concrete. The seam was clean. The work was old, but it had been done well by someone who knew what he was doing. "Why would Grandpa have this?" she said. "I don't know." "What did he keep down there?" "I don't know." She looked up at him. Her flashlight made a pale ring on the underside of his jaw. "Dad, what kind of man hides a door under the floor of his house?" Theo did not have an answer. He thought about the patient hands and the cedar smell. He thought about the way Cornelius had been described in his obituary as an art restorer. He thought about all the years his grandfather had spent traveling for work, returning with stories about old estates and forgotten collections, and about how Theo had never once thought to ask what those stories really meant. "We need to find the combination," he said. They searched for the rest of that day and well into the night. They went through every drawer in the study. They pulled books down off the shelves and shook them, hoping a slip of paper might fall. They examined the backs of photographs. They tapped the walls behind the bookcases. The house yielded nothing. It was nearly midnight when Adelaide found the journal. It was wedged under a stack of yellowed newspapers in the bottom drawer of the desk. A leather-bound book with a cracked spine and a strip of cloth bound around it like a tourniquet. She brought it to the dining room table where Theo was nursing a cup of coffee and laid it down between them. "I don't think anyone has touched this since he died," she said. Theo opened it. The handwriting was Cornelius's. He recognized it from a single birthday card, a card he had kept for 30 years in a shoebox of childhood things. The script was small and precise, slanting slightly to the right. The kind of hand they don't teach anymore. The entries were not dated. They read like the marginal notes of a careful man. Verified provenance on the landscape. Documentation complete. Met with the estate attorney. Terms acceptable. Most of it meant nothing. Some of it stopped Theo in his tracks. Some things are worth more than money. Some things must be protected at all costs. I have spent my life acquiring pieces that would otherwise have been lost or destroyed. This is not a treasure. It is a sacred trust. Whoever inherits this burden must understand. There are people who would do anything to claim what is below. People who believe ownership matters more than stewardship. They are wrong. They have always been wrong. Theo read it twice. Then he read it aloud. Adelaide listened with her hand pressed to her mouth. "What does that mean?" she said. "What is below?" He kept turning pages. The entries grew sparser as the journal went on, as if Cornelius had been growing tired toward the end of his life. Near the back, 3 blank pages. And after them, in the same precise hand, a single line. "I have left my voice for the future. When the truth needs to be heard, it will speak." Adelaide read it over his shoulder. "Dad, what does that mean?" "I don't know." Below that line, separated by a 1/4 inch of empty paper, 4 numerals, 7392. They looked at each other across the table. Theo did not speak. He stood up, picked up the work light, and started for the basement. Adelaide grabbed the journal and followed. The lock was old, but the mechanism had been kept clean. He spun the dials with hands that had remembered how to be steady. 7, 3, 9, 2. He pulled. Nothing. He tried it again, slower. Nothing. He tried the year of his birth, the year of his grandfather's birth, the year Cornelius had died. Nothing. He sat back on his heels. The basement was cold. His breath made a small ghost in the work light. "Try it backwards," Adelaide said. He looked up. "The numbers," she said. "Try them in reverse. 2, 9, 3, 7. He spun the dials. 2, 9, 3, 7. He pulled. The shackle slid free with a single soft click that in the silence of that basement sounded like a door opening on something that had been waiting a very long time to be answered. For a moment, neither of them moved. Adelaide was the first to speak. "Dad," she said, "should we open it?" Theo set the lock down on the concrete. He thought about the journal, about the warning. People who would do anything to claim what is below. He thought about the bills stacked on the kitchen counter and the call from the collection agency he had not returned, and the coat with the worn cuffs that his daughter was still wearing because they could not afford a new one. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about his grandfather alone in this house, writing those words in that small, careful hand, leaving them for someone he would never live to meet. "Yes," he said. "We open it." The trapdoor was heavier than he expected. The hinges had been kept oiled, but 30 years was 30 years, and they protested as he hauled it back. Adelaide steadied the other side. Together they lifted, and the iron tipped past its center of gravity and fell open against the floor with a deep iron boom that rolled up through the house like a clap of underground thunder. Below was darkness. Stone steps descended away from them, disappearing past the reach of the work light. The air that rose up out of the opening was cool and dry, climate-controlled, impossibly clean compared to the damp basement around them. It smelled of old paper and canvas and something faintly chemical. The smell of preservation. The smell of a museum in the hour before opening. Theo lifted the work light over the edge and angled it down. The beam picked out a chamber larger than the basement above. Concrete walls. Wooden crates stacked 2 and 3 high along every wall, their sides stenciled with codes he could not read. Filing cabinets in one corner gleaming dully untouched by rust. Against the far wall, draped shapes under heavy canvas. The shapes of frames. The shapes of paintings. More than he could count in a single sweep of the light. And in the center of the chamber, dominating it taller than a man, and twice as wide, a single covered canvas resting on a custom wooden easel. Its dimensions impossible, its presence somehow weightier than the iron and stone that had hidden it. Adelaide made a sound he had never heard her make before. It was not quite a word. Theo stood at the edge of the opening with the light in his hand. He could feel his pulse in his teeth. "Lord," he whispered. He did not know yet what he was looking at. He did not know yet that the canvas in the center of the room had been presumed destroyed for over 70 years, or that it would be valued by men who knew about such things at $500 million. He did not know about the fire in 1952. He did not know about the family that had died in it. He did not know about Thaddeus Sterling, dead now for decades, or about Howard Sterling III, alive and 71, and watching even now from a black sedan parked half a mile down the road. He did not know about the letter sealed in plastic and taped to the back of a filing cabinet drawer, a letter addressed to him by name, a letter that began, "Open only if they come for it." He did not know any of that, not yet. What he knew in that moment was this: His grandfather had been a man with a secret. The secret had cost him everything, or had been everything depending on how you looked at it. And now it was Theo's secret. Now it was Theo's burden, whether he wanted it or not, whether he was ready or not. The door had opened and there was no closing it again. He looked at his daughter. Adelaide's face was pale in the work light, her eyes wide, her hand reaching unconsciously for his. "Whatever this is," she said quietly, "whatever it turns out to be, we do this together." Theo nodded. He could not yet speak. He could only stand there at the edge of the opening with his daughter's hand in his, looking down into the chamber his grandfather had built, and the life he was about to inherit and feel for the first time since the rain had soaked through that borrowed black suit on that gray Tuesday in October. Something he could not at first identify. It took him a long moment to recognize it. It was purpose. The wind moved against the boarded windows above them. The old house settled and creaked, adjusting after 30 empty years to having something other than dust inside it. Outside, somewhere down the long gravel road, a car engine idled and went still. A man with a phone made a call he had been waiting most of his adult life to make. But Theo did not hear it. Theo was looking down into the dark, into the chamber, into the canvas at its center, into a future he could not yet see the shape of. And for the first time in a long time, he did not look away. He reached for the first stone step. Adelaide gripped his hand tighter. Together in the silence beneath that house, they began to descend. The chamber smelled of cedar and old paper, and something Theo could not name, something that lived in the back of the throat, like the memory of a church on a winter morning. 15 stone steps. He counted them as he went down. Adelaide came behind him with the journal pressed flat against her chest, like a thing she was afraid she might drop. The floor at the bottom was concrete, troweled smooth level as a billiard table. The work light caught the edges of crates and threw their shadows long against the far wall. He could see now what he had only glimpsed from above. The chamber ran past the footprint of the house. Someone had dug out and reinforced this whole space room enough for a small bowling alley, walls poured thick enough to withstand a small bomb. Up in the corners where the ceiling met the walls, he could make out the dark mouths of ventilation ducts, climate control, the kind of system a museum runs. His grandfather had built a vault under his own house. Adelaide stepped down beside him and just stood there. He could hear her breathing. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "What did he do?" "I don't know yet." He moved to the nearest crate. The wood was good. Pine, maybe oiled, no rot, no warp. The lid had brass latches that opened without complaint when he thumbed them. He raised the work light. He lifted the lid. Inside, nested in custom-cut foam, was a painting. It was small, maybe 12 inches by 16. A young woman in a dark dress with a high collar. Her hair the color of new copper. Her eyes fixed on something just past the painter's shoulder. The varnish had the faint, fine cracking that came only from centuries. The colors were still alive. The red of her lip was the red of a wound that had never closed. Theo did not know much about art. He knew what he was looking at anyway. "This is real," he said. Adelaide had gone still beside him. "How do you know?" "I don't know how I know. I know." He closed the lid carefully. He moved to the next crate. He opened it. A bronze. A small figure of a horse rearing no bigger than a man's forearm. The patina was the green of deep water. There were marks on the underside that meant nothing to him. He closed it. The next. A wooden box within the crate hinged lined with velvet. Inside, a manuscript page, vellum the ink, the brown of old blood, the borders illuminated in gold leaf, so thin you could see it ripple under the light. He closed it. By the time they reached the filing cabinets, Adelaide had begun to cry quietly, the way she had cried at her mother's funeral. No sound, just a steady wet shine on her cheeks that she did not bother to wipe away. The cabinets were not locked. Theo opened the top drawer of the nearest one. It was full of folders, hundreds of them, each labeled in Cornelius's careful hand. He pulled one at random and laid it open on top of the cabinet. Photographs, 3 of them of the painting they had just seen, front, back. Detail of the lower right corner where, under magnification, a signature emerged from the varnish. Below the photographs, 3 pages of typed notes. Provenance, acquisition history, authentication methodology. A list of comparable works in private and institutional collections. The address of the estate sale in Connecticut, 1968, where Cornelius had bought the painting for $90 from a family that did not know what they were selling. The painting, Cornelius's note said, was attributed to a minor master of the Florentine school. Probable workshop production. Estimated value at acquisition $800. Current estimated value $70,000. Recommended disposition retain. Theo read the file twice. Then he put it back and pulled another. Then another. Then another. Every piece in this room was documented. Every piece had a story. Every piece had a paper trail going back, in some cases, 3 centuries. His grandfather had not been a collector. He had been a historian, a keeper. The kind of man who, in another life, would have run a museum and who had, in this one, built his own. Adelaide had drifted to the far wall. She stood in front of one of the draped shapes. She did not touch it. Dad. He came over. "This one's big," she said. He looked at the shape under the canvas. It was the largest of the frame pieces along the wall, 6 feet wide, easily, 4 feet tall. He took the corner of the cloth between his thumb and forefinger. He pulled it back. He pulled it the rest of the way off. For a long time he did not move. It was a landscape. Trees, a river, a small figure walking along a path in the foreground. The light in it was the light of a late afternoon in autumn, the kind of light that does not exist in real life, only in the eye of someone who had loved that hour enough to learn how to put it down on canvas. He did not know who had painted it. He did not need to. He stood in front of it and felt his eyes burn and could not have said, if asked, what it was he was responding to, only that he had been hollowed out for 60 days. And here was something that filled a space inside him he had not known was empty. Adelaide spoke first. "We need help," she said. "Yeah. We can't be alone with this." Theo did not answer. "We have to tell somebody, Dad. We have to call somebody who knows what this is." "I know, but not yet." He looked at her. "We need to know what we have first," he said. "Before we tell anyone, we need to know. Because once we tell, we don't get to take it back." She nodded slowly. She understood him. She had always understood him. They went back up the stairs at 3 in the morning. They closed the trapdoor. Theo set the lock back through the hasp and spun the dials. They covered the trapdoor with the pried boards as best they could. They went upstairs. Adelaide fell asleep on the living room floor with her hands still around the journal. Theo sat in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold an hour before and did not sleep at all. In the morning, he called Edmund Hayes. They had worked together once years ago at a software firm in Pittsburgh. Edmund had been the company's senior developer and a bad fit for the work. A man who left at 6 every night to teach a night class on Italian painting at the community college, who kept catalogs of museum exhibitions in his desk drawer where other men kept liquor. Halfway through that year, Edmund had quit and gone back to graduate school. Last Theo had heard, he was a tenured professor of art history at Carnegie Mellon. They had exchanged Christmas cards for a while, and then stopped exchanging anything in the way men do. The phone rang 4 times before Edmund picked up. Theo. My God, I heard about Eleanor. I'm so sorry. I should have called. It's all right. It isn't all right. It's all right, Edmund. I need a favor. There was a small silence on the line. Anything Edmund said. Name it. I need you to come up here. To my grandfather's place. I have something I need you to look at. What kind of something? Theo looked at the wall above the kitchen sink. There was a faint rectangle of darker paint where a calendar had hung for decades and finally fallen. The kind I don't want to describe over the phone. Edmund was quiet for a long moment. Address, he said. Theo gave it to him. 2 days. I have a class tomorrow I can't move. 2 days. 2 days. Theo. Whatever this is. Are you all right? Theo thought about it. I don't know yet, he said. Edmund arrived on a Saturday afternoon in a Subaru that had been a respectable car 10 years ago. He climbed out of it in a corduroy jacket and the same beard he had grown when he quit the software firm, only grayer. He looked at the house. He looked at Theo. He hugged him without asking, a long, awkward hug. The hug of a man who had spent a lot of time wishing he had been a better friend. I should have called, he said again. You're here now. Adelaide came out onto the porch. Edmund shook her hand and said, You look like your mother. Adelaide smiled the smile she had been practicing all week and led him inside. They fed him coffee. They sat him in the kitchen. Theo told him the story from the beginning, the funeral, the foreclosure, the Ashbys, the lawyer, the house. Edmund listened without interrupting. When Theo got to the trapdoor and the journal and the descent, Edmund set his coffee down and did not pick it up again. Show me, he said. They took him down. Edmund stood at the bottom of the stone steps with his hands at his sides for what felt like a full minute. He did not move. He did not speak. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the crates and the cabinets and the draped shapes along the wall, and his face went through a series of small adjustments, like a man recalibrating instruments after a long flight. Theo, he said finally. His voice had gone careful. Yeah, I need you to understand something. Before I look at any of this, I need you to understand that what I am about to do is the work of months, not minutes. What I can tell you today is going to be a guess, an educated guess, but a guess. Do you understand? Yes. Show me a piece. Theo took him to the first crate. The young woman with the copper hair. Edmund put on a pair of cotton gloves he produced from his jacket pocket. He took the painting out. He carried it to a wooden crate he turned on its side for a work table. He pulled a jeweler's loop from his shirt and bent over the canvas. He was bent over it for 20 minutes. When he straightened up, his face had gone the color of paper. Show me the others, he said. Theo took him to the bronze, then to the manuscript, then to a Chinese porcelain from a crate near the back. Edmund examined each in turn. He took photographs. He pulled measurements with a small steel ruler. He muttered to himself in a language Theo did not entirely follow, names and centuries, and provenance terms that fell out of him like a man counting under his breath. It was almost 3 hours before Theo led him to the landscape. Edmund stood in front of it for a long time. "What is it?" Theo said. "I don't know yet. Best guess." Edmund did not answer. Theo waited. "It is the work of a very great hand," Edmund said. "I will tell you that much. I will not tell you more until I have spent more time with it." "There's one more," Theo said. Edmund looked at him. "The biggest one," Theo said. "The one on the easel." He led Edmund to the center of the chamber. The shape under the canvas drape was nearly the height of the ceiling. Adelaide stood back by the stairs, the journal still in her arms, watching them. Theo took the edge of the drape in both hands. He looked at Edmund. "You ready?" he said. Edmund nodded once. Theo pulled. The canvas came away in a single long whisper. It pooled at his feet. The painting on the easel was 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. It depicted a scene from antiquity. Men in robes, a long banquet table, a doorway opening onto a city in the distance under a sky the color of beaten gold. The figures were arranged with the easy mastery of a man who knew bodies and how they moved through space. The colors had the impossible glow that only the finest pigments under the finest varnish produced. It was beautiful. It was beautiful the way a great storm is beautiful, the way a piece of music can be beautiful, the way certain old buildings are beautiful at dusk. It made the rest of the chamber, the manuscripts and bronzes and the small portrait of the woman with the copper hair, look like things people had made. This was a thing that had been given. Edmund stopped breathing. Theo watched him stop breathing. It went on long enough that Theo finally said, "Edmund." Edmund put a hand on the crate beside him to steady himself. "Theo," he said. "Yeah, sit down. Just tell me." "Sit down, Theo. Please." Theo did not sit down. He stood where he was. Adelaide came up beside him without being asked and slid her hand into his. Edmund turned to face them. He had his loupe in his hand still. He was holding it the way a man holds something he has forgotten he is holding. In 1952, he said there was a fire at an estate in Connecticut. A family was killed. The Sterling Devereaux family. You may not have heard of them. They were not famous in the way the Vanderbilts or the Rockefellers were famous. They were the kind of money that did not need to be famous. Old money. Quiet money. They had spent 4 generations putting together what was at that time the largest private art collection in the United States. The patriarch's name was Edward Devereaux. His wife was Catherine. They had no surviving children. The fire took the house, the family, and the staff. 13 people died that night. The collection was presumed lost in the fire. The insurance companies paid out something like $50 million, which in 1952 was a number that does not bear thinking about. The insurance companies were destroyed by it. The carriers that survived merged or sold out. Everything in that collection, every catalog, every photograph, every piece was understood to be gone. It was the single greatest cultural loss of the American 20th century. There were museum directors who wept when they heard. Edmund stopped. He swallowed. The centerpiece of that collection, he said. The piece that the catalog said Edward Devereaux loved more than any other. The piece that Catherine Devereaux had refused to lend to the Met in 1947. The piece that hung above the main staircase in the Great Hall of the Sterling Devereaux estate. He raised his hand and pointed. That, he said, is the centerpiece. Theo did not understand. He did understand. He didn't want to understand. How much, he heard himself say. The question came out of his mouth without his permission. Edmund looked at him. Theo, you're not asking the right question. Tell me anyway. A piece like that, provenance intact, documented, authenticated, presumed destroyed for 70 years, returning to the market. He shook his head as if to clear it. $500 million, he said. Maybe more. There is no maybe more. I am lowballing. There is no comparable Theo. There has not been a piece like this on any market anywhere since I was born. The chamber was very quiet. Adelaide squeezed Theo's hand so hard he could feel her fingernails through his shirt. Theo did not say anything for a long time. He looked at the painting, at the gold sky, at the men at the table, at the doorway opening onto the distant city. He thought about his grandfather, about the patient hands, about cedar and turpentine and old paper, about a man who had built a vault under his own house and spent 40 years filling it with the things other people had forgotten how to love. "This isn't a collection," Theo said. The words came out of him slowly, as if he were finding them one at a time. "This is somebody else's collection. He didn't make this. He saved it." Edmund nodded. "That's what I'm trying to tell you," he said. "Your grandfather did not own this. Your grandfather rescued this. And the only way he could have rescued it is if he was at that estate the night it burned, or the day after, before anyone else knew what was left." Adelaide spoke then. Her voice was very small. "What does that mean, Edmund? For us? What does that mean?" Edmund looked at her with the saddest face Theo had ever seen on a man. "It means," he said, "that the Sterling family is still out there, and they have spent 70 years looking for this." That night after Edmund had gone, Theo sat alone in the kitchen with the bottle of bourbon he had found unopened in a cabinet above the stove. He poured an inch of it into a glass and looked at it for a long time. He did not drink it. He sat with it in front of him and watched the kitchen lights slide along the rim of the glass while the wind moved against the house outside. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about the cancer that had taken her in 6 weeks. He thought about the hospital bill that had arrived that morning, third notice in red, with a number on it that he had stopped trying to read. He thought about one painting, just one, just the smallest one. The young woman with the copper hair. $70,000, Cornelius's file had said. $70,000 would pay off the hospital. It would let him get Adelaide a winter coat that did not have a frayed cuff. It would put them in a furnace that worked. It would buy him 6 months. He could find work in 6 months. He could put a life back together in 6 months. One painting, out of hundreds. One small painting sold quietly to a collector who would not ask questions. And Eleanor's last months would not be the millstone he wore around his neck every morning of the life she had left him to live. He picked up the glass. He held it. "Eleanor," he said quietly to no one. "Honey, you'd forgive me, wouldn't you? For one. For just one." He waited. The house was quiet. Adelaide was asleep upstairs. The wind moved against the boards. He set the glass down without drinking. He stood up. He walked into the living room. He took the photograph of Cornelius and his grandmother off the mantel and looked at it for a long time. The young woman in the sundress was smiling at the camera. Cornelius was smiling at her. He had not been a hero in that photograph. He had been a man on a porch with the woman he loved. He had not yet been the man who would walk into a burned house and carry 70 years of his life into a vault under his floor. A man becomes who he becomes by the things he chooses not to do. Theo put the photograph back on the mantel. He turned out the kitchen light. He poured the bourbon back into the bottle. He went upstairs to bed. He did not sleep that night either, but he did not need to. He had decided. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, Theo carried out a bag of trash and noticed the black sedan. It was parked 200 yards down the gravel road in the shade of a stand of pines. Tinted windows. Engine off. He stood at the end of the driveway with the trash bag in his hand and stared at it. Nothing moved inside. After a moment, he carried the bag to the can. When he came back, the sedan was gone. That night, Adelaide came down to the kitchen with her laptop, and the look on her face he had not seen since the day her mother died. "Read this," she said. She turned the laptop to face him. It was an email. The subject line was blank. The sender was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. The body of the message was 3 sentences long. "You have something that does not belong to you. The longer you keep it, the worse this will be. Talk to your father about being reasonable." Theo read it twice. "When did this come?" he said. 20 minutes ago." He looked at her. She was not crying. She was past crying. She was standing in the kitchen of a house she had spent 6 weeks helping him put back together, holding a laptop that contained a threat from a person who knew his name. Knew her name, knew where they lived. The hair at her temples was damp. She had been working out the panic in the bathroom upstairs before she came down. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. This isn't our fight. Mom just died. I just lost her. I can't lose you." He set the laptop down on the table. He came around it and put his arms around her, and after a moment she let go of the thing she had been holding all week and cried against his shoulder hard, the way she had not let herself cry once, not at the funeral, not at the foreclosure, not on the drive up the mountain. When she had finished, he held her at arm's length. "Listen to me," he said. She nodded. "You are right. This isn't our fight. We didn't start it. Your great-grandfather started it, and other men, dead men, started it before him. We could have walked away. If we hadn't gone down those stairs, we could have walked away." She nodded again. "But we went down the stairs. And now there is no walking away. Because that man down the road in the black sedan, he doesn't care that we just want to be left alone. He has spent his whole life looking for what's under this floor. And now he thinks he has found it. He is not going to go away because we ask him to." She was looking at him now with her mother's eyes. He had to keep going. If he stopped, he would not get started again. "That email is the reason we have to fight," he said. "Not the reason we shouldn't. If we run from this, he wins. If we sell, he wins. If we give it back, he wins. And your great-grandfather, who spent 40 years of his life alone in this house, keeping something safe so that the rest of the world could one day see it. Your great-grandfather will have died for nothing. And I'm not going to be the man who lets that happen. I'm not going to be the man your mother thought she married only to find out at the end that he wasn't." He stopped. His throat had gone tight. "That is what I have left," he said. "That is the only thing I have left to give you. And I am giving it to you whether you want it or not." Adelaide looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. She squared her shoulders. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad." The next morning, Theo went back down into the chamber alone. He spent 2 hours opening filing cabinets. He read until his eyes blurred. He was looking for something he could not have named if asked, only that he would know it when he found it. He found it taped to the back of the bottom drawer of the third cabinet. A manila envelope sealed with packing tape that had gone yellow with time. On the front, in Cornelius's small, precise hand, his own name, Theodore. And below it, smaller underlined twice open only if they come for it. Theo sat down on the concrete floor of his grandfather's vault and held the envelope in his hands for a long time before he broke the seal. When he opened it, 3 things came out. A letter 8 pages typed on a manual typewriter on paper that had yellowed at the edges. A cassette tape, the kind no one had used in 20 years, in a plastic case marked with a single date in Cornelius's hand. October 1989. And a folded sheet of paper that, when Theo opened it, turned out to be a hand-drawn map of an estate in Connecticut, with the words "Servants' Entrance" labeled at one corner. And at the center of the map, a black X, and beside the X, in his grandfather's small, careful writing, 3 words: "The vault survived." Theo sat with the letter on his knee and began to read. When he was done an hour later, he did not move for a long time. The chamber was very still around him. The work light hummed. Somewhere above his head, he could hear Adelaide moving in the kitchen. The small, ordinary sounds of a daughter making coffee, going on with her day, not yet knowing that the man who had come down these stairs that morning was not the man who was going to come back up. His grandfather had not been an art restorer who had quietly collected things. His grandfather had been a witness to a murder. The fire of 1952 had not been an accident. Thaddeus Sterling, the family attorney, had killed Edward Devereux and Catherine Devereux and the 11 people who worked for them so that he could steal the collection and sell it piece by piece on the black market over the rest of his life. Cornelius Whitmore had been the restorer Edward Devereux had hired 3 months before his death. The man who had been given keys to the vault. The man Thaddeus Sterling had not known about. Cornelius had arrived at the smoking ruin 3 days after the fire to do the work he had been contracted for, and had found Thaddeus Sterling already in the basement going through what was left, and had been offered a choice: a partnership or a 14th body. Cornelius had said yes to the partnership. He had said yes long enough to walk out of that basement alive. That night he had gone back, alone. He had spent 3 weeks emptying the vault piece by piece into the back of a panel truck in the dark, while Thaddeus Sterling believed he was waiting on Cornelius to authenticate everything before they began selling. By the time Sterling realized what had happened, the collection was gone, and Cornelius had spent the next 40 years living quietly in a house in Bedford County, Pennsylvania, with a vault under the floor, waiting for a moment that never came in his lifetime, when the Sterling family's power was diminished enough that the truth could be told. He had not been able to tell the FBI. He had tried. The Sterlings had buried it. He had not been able to tell a journalist. He had tried. The Sterlings had buried them too. The letter ended with a paragraph that Theo would carry in his head for the rest of his life. "I am leaving you a burden, Theodore. I am sorry for that. I would have preferred to leave you a fortune or a name or a fishing rod. But the world hands a man what it hands him, and a man either picks it up or he doesn't. If you have opened this envelope, then they have come for what is below, and you have to make a choice. I cannot tell you what to choose. I can only tell you that I made my choice in 1952, in a burned basement, and I have not regretted it for a single hour of the 40 years since. Whatever you decide, know this: you are not alone in it. I have left my voice for the moment when you will need it most. Trust the men who help you. Tell the truth in a loud voice. And remember that some things are worth more than money, and some things must be protected at all costs." Theo folded the letter. He put it back into the envelope with the tape and the map. He sat on the floor of the chamber his grandfather had built and put his face in his hands. When he came back up the stairs an hour later, he was a different man. Adelaide was in the kitchen. She turned from the stove when she heard him on the basement stairs, and whatever she saw in his face made her set down the wooden spoon she was holding. "Dad," she said. He laid the envelope on the kitchen table. "We need a lawyer," he said. "We need a researcher. We need every friend we have left." He paused. He looked at his daughter. And then he said, "We are going to take these people down." Outside in the long shadows of the late November afternoon, the black sedan was back. It sat at the bend in the road, with its engine off and its windows dark, watching the house in which a man named Theodore Whitmore had just decided finally and completely that he was done losing. In the sedan, a phone rang. A man with white hair and a soft, handsome face that had aged like an apple left on a windowsill picked it up. He listened. He smiled. "It's time Howard Sterling III said quietly to ourselves. To no one. To the dead man under the floor. It's time we paid Mr. Whitmore a visit." Beatrice Lockhart called on a Thursday morning in early December, and her voice on the phone was the voice of a woman who had been waiting a long time to make this call. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "my name is Beatrice Lockhart. I am a researcher. I have been investigating the Sterling family for 22 years. I would very much like to meet with you. I think we have a great deal to discuss." Theo was standing at the kitchen window. The black sedan was back at the bend in the road. It had been back every morning for a week. "How did you get this number?" he said. "The same way the man in the sedan got it," she said. "The Sterlings are not the only people who have been watching your grandfather's house, Mr. Whitmore. They are simply the only ones who mean you harm." He let that sit on the line for a moment. "There is a diner," she said. "The Maple Spoon on Route 30. I will be there tomorrow at 10. I will sit at the booth at the back. I will be alone." My grandmother was Alice Hoffman. She was the head housekeeper at the Sterling Devereaux estate. She died in the fire. I have spent my adult life trying to prove what happened that night. I think your grandfather had the proof. I think you have it now. The line went quiet. "Mr. Whitmore, you do not have to come, but if you come, I will tell you everything I know, and I will ask you for nothing in return except a hearing. That is all. 10 o'clock. The Maple Spoon. Tomorrow." She hung up. Theo stood at the kitchen window with the phone in his hand for a long time after the line went dead. He drove down the mountain alone. Adelaide had wanted to come. He had said no. Not the first meeting. If Beatrice Lockhart was who she said she was, he wanted to look her in the eyes across a table by himself, the way his grandfather would have done before he brought his daughter anywhere near her. The Maple Spoon was a low brick building with a parking lot full of pickup trucks. He went in and the bell above the door rang the way bells above doors in places like that have rung for 100 years. The booth at the back held a woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair and a face that had been pretty once and had become something better than pretty, which is interesting. She had a leather satchel beside her on the bench. She was reading a paperback. She looked up when he came down the aisle, and she did not smile, but something in her face eased. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Theo slid into the booth across from her. She closed her book. She set it aside. "I want to show you something before we talk," she said. She opened the satchel. She took out a single photograph and turned it so he could see. A young woman in a starched uniform standing on the steps of a great stone house with an elderly couple. The couple were dressed for a summer afternoon in 1951. The young woman looked 16, 17, no older. She was smiling at the camera. She had Beatrice Lockhart's face. "That is my grandmother," Beatrice said, Alice. She was 15 years old when this picture was taken. She was 16 when she died. She did not move the picture. She did not die of smoke inhalation, Mr. Whitmore. The death certificate said smoke inhalation. The death certificates of all 13 people in that house said smoke inhalation. But my grandmother, 3 days before the fire, called her sister and said that men had come to the house. She said the family attorney had been there, and there had been an argument. She said Mr. Devereaux had been shouting. She said something was very wrong. Her sister told her to leave. She told her to take the train home that night. Beatrice tapped the photograph once with her finger. My grandmother did not leave, she said. She would not leave the family. And 3 days later, they were all dead, and the official story was a bad wire in the kitchen. She slid the photograph back into the satchel. I am not asking you to believe me, she said. I am telling you what I have spent 22 years putting together. I have FBI files. I have transcripts. I have testimony from people who worked in the Sterling household over the years and who have died in ways that did not look like accidents until you put them in a row. The Sterlings built their family fortune on what they took out of that house, Mr. Whitmore. They have built 4 generations of money and influence on it, and they have never stopped looking for what they couldn't find that night. Theo did not speak. Your grandfather, she said, Cornelius Whitmore. I have known his name for 9 years. I tracked him through estate records and customs declarations and a paper trail you would not believe. I came to this county 6 years ago. I sat in this diner. I watched his house from a hill above the road for a summer. I never approached him. I never approached your father. I waited. Why, Theo said. Beatrice looked at him. Because I did not have the proof, she said. And the moment I knocked on that door, the Sterlings would know I had found him. And whatever was in that house would have been gone within a week. I waited until you opened the door yourself. I am sorry I waited. I have been sorry every morning for 9 years. The waitress came. They ordered coffee. They did not order food. The waitress went away. I'm going to ask you a question, Theo said. And I want you to answer it honestly. Because if I think you are lying to me, I am going to walk out that door, and you will never hear from me again. Ask. What do you want? Beatrice did not answer at once. She looked down at the table. She looked back up. I want my grandmother's name in a newspaper, she said. I want it in a history book. I want a man named Howard Sterling to go to a federal courthouse in handcuffs. I want the things in that house under your grandfather's floor to be in a museum where children can see them. And I want a plaque next to them that has my grandmother's name on it. I do not want $1 of any of it, Mr. Whitmore. I have a teacher's pension and a paid-off car. I've spent everything I had on this. What I want is for the dead to stop being a footnote. She stopped. Her eyes were dry. She had been carrying this for so long that crying was no longer something her body remembered how to do. That she said, "That is what I want." Theo looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and shook her hand. 3 days later, Beatrice Lockhart was in the dining room of Cornelius Whitmore's house, with her satchel open on the table and 3 banker's boxes on the floor beside her chair. Adelaide had taken to her instantly, in the way Adelaide took to people who did not lie. Edmund had driven up from Pittsburgh that morning with a colleague from the Carnegie, a woman named Teresa Bouchard, who specialized in 20th century provenance disputes. Theo had called a lawyer he had found through a referral from a former co-worker, a woman named Vivian Marsh, 61 years old, gray-haired, sharp as broken glass, who had spent her career in the small, specialized field of disputed art recovery, and who had told him on the phone in the 3rd minute of their conversation that she would take his case for a flat fee against the eventual settlement, and not $1 more. "I've been waiting to meet your grandfather for 30 years, Vivian had said. I did not know his name. I knew there had to be someone. There is always someone. He is the one I was waiting for. She arrived at the house on a Saturday morning in a sensible coat. She accepted a cup of coffee. She set a yellow legal pad on the dining room table and uncapped a black pen and said, "All right, tell me everything." They told her everything. When they were done 6 hours later, Vivian Marsh closed her legal pad and folded her hands on top of it and looked across the table at Theo. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I want to be very plain with you. The Sterlings have an army of lawyers and they have 100 years of practice using them. The moment we file, they will file. Their filing will be a lawsuit accusing your grandfather of theft. They will produce documents. The documents will be forgeries. The documents will be excellent forgeries. They have had decades to prepare them. They will allege that your grandfather was contracted by the Sterling family in 1952 to transport certain items after the fire, that he never delivered those items, and that everything in your basement is therefore stolen property belonging to them. They will be in court within 10 days. They will demand an emergency hearing. They will ask for a writ allowing them to enter the property and inventory the collection. If they get that writ, the collection disappears. If we are not faster than them, we lose." She paused. "We will not be slower than them," she said. "We will file first." "What do you need from me?" Theo said. Everything she said. The journal, the letter, the map, the tape, the files, every photograph, every record of provenance. I want it all photographed and scanned by Monday morning. I want 3 copies of every digital file in 3 different cloud accounts with 3 different passwords, none of which you write down anywhere. I want 1 physical copy in a safety deposit box in a bank in Pittsburgh under a name that is not yours. I want 1 physical copy with me. I want 1 physical copy buried, literally buried in the ground on this property in a location I do not know. She set down her pen. "And I want you," she said, "to understand that from the moment we file, you are going to be in the most dangerous month of your life. The Sterlings have killed people for less than this. I am not being dramatic. I am telling you a thing that is true. You will need to think about where Adelaide stays at night. You will need to think about the calls you take. You will need to think about who you trust." Theo looked at his daughter across the table. "I trust everyone in this room," he said. Vivian Marsh nodded once. "Then we file on Tuesday," she said. They filed on Tuesday. The Sterling lawsuit landed on Friday. It was exactly what Vivian had predicted. Forged contracts, forged correspondence, a demand that the collection be impounded pending resolution. The hearing was set for the 2nd week of January. 2 days after the lawsuit, the local paper ran a story. Theo read it at the kitchen table. The story quoted Roland Ashby, identified as the father-in-law of the defendant who had volunteered to testify for the Sterling family. Roland was quoted as saying that he had long suspected something was wrong in the Whitmore household, that his late daughter had hinted at strange behavior, that he hoped the truth would finally come out. Theo read the article twice. He folded the paper. He set it down. Adelaide came into the kitchen. She read the article over his shoulder. She did not say anything. After a while, she put her hand on his arm. "He killed her, Dad. He's saying you killed her." Theo did not move. He has always been saying it. Now he's just saying it where they print it. He turned to her. "He gets to live with that," Theo said. "We don't. We have a hearing in 7 weeks." The night before the hearing, Theo went down into the chamber alone. He brought a folding chair. He set it up in the middle of the floor in front of the great painting on its easel. He sat in it. He looked at the painting for a long time. The men at the table, the gold sky, the doorway opening onto the distant city. He thought about his grandfather standing in front of this same painting 40 years ago, alone in a freshly poured concrete room under the house he had bought in cash. putting down on paper in his small, careful hand the words that would one day come out of Vivian Marsh's mouth in a courtroom in Pittsburgh. He thought about Eleanor. He had not talked to her in a while. He had not let himself. The grief, when he let it, came up all at once and took the breath out of him, and he could not afford to be without breath in the weeks leading up to the hearing. He talked to her now. "Honey," he said. His own voice surprised him in the silence of the chamber. "Honey, I don't know if I can do this. I'm going to walk into a courtroom tomorrow and I'm going to tell a judge that my grandfather was a witness to a mass murder and that your father is helping the murderer's grandson try to bury the truth. I'm going to do it on television. Adelaide is going to be in the room. Your parents are going to be in the room. I am going to be the man you fell in love with, or I am going to be the man your father always said I was. There is no third option. And I do not know if I am the first man or the second." He stopped. He looked at the painting. "I think I'm the first one," he said. "I think you wouldn't have stayed with me if I wasn't. But I'm scared, honey. I am scared in a way I haven't been since the doctor came out into the hallway." The chamber did not answer. The chamber had never answered. But somewhere in the silence, he felt his grandfather's hand on his shoulder. He felt it the way you feel a hand on your shoulder when you know there is no one in the room with you, and you are too tired to question the comfort. He sat there for another hour. Then he stood up. He folded the chair. He went back up the stairs. He slept that night for the first time in 3 weeks. The courthouse was an old one with marble floors that gave back the sound of every footstep. Theo wore the only suit he owned. It was the suit he had worn to Eleanor's funeral. He had thought about buying a new one. He had decided against it. There was a kind of vow in wearing the funeral suit. He could not have explained it. He did not need to. Adelaide walked beside him. She wore a black dress and a gray wool coat that Mrs. Bennett, their hangar neighbor from down the road, had pressed into her hands the day before, with the words, "You wear this, honey. It was my daughter's." She would have wanted a girl to have it on a day like this. The press was on the steps. Theo did not stop for them. He did not look at them. Vivian had told him not to, and he had not needed to be told twice. Inside the courtroom was already full. Theo saw Howard Sterling III in the front row behind the plaintiff's table. He was a small, handsome, white-haired man in a charcoal suit, and he looked. Theo thought like a banker, or a man who owned racehorses. He did not look like a man whose grandfather had murdered 13 people. They never did. 2 seats down from Howard Sterling sat Roland Ashby. Theo had not seen him since the funeral. The man had aged. The granite of his face had begun to crack. He was looking at Theo with an expression Theo could not read. It was not triumph. It was something more complicated. Theo held his gaze for a moment, and then looked away. There was nothing in that face for him anymore. There had not been for a long time. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Miriam Holloway. She had a face that gave nothing away. Vivian had told him this was good. A judge who gave nothing away was a judge who was paying attention. The Sterling attorney was a silver-haired man named Buchanan. He rose first. He spoke for 40 minutes. He was good. He was very good. He laid out a story in which Cornelius Whitmore had been a small-time art handler, hired by the Sterling family in 1952 to assist with the recovery of certain insured items from the ruin of the Devereaux estate who had absconded with those items, and whose grandson was now claiming ownership of $500 million in stolen property. He produced his documents. He spoke of contracts and signatures and bills of lading. He spoke of 70 years of patient effort by the Sterling family to recover what was rightfully theirs. He spoke of justice delayed but not denied, When he sat down, Theo could feel the room going his way. He could feel it the way you feel weather changing in your knees. Vivian rose. She did not move from behind the table. She did not pace. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, and she spoke quietly, and the room had to lean forward to hear her. And so it did. "Your Honor," she said, "this case is not what Mr. Buchanan has described. This case is about the murder of 13 people in Connecticut in 1952. It is about an attempt by the Sterling family then and now to convert that murder into a fortune. It is about a single man, an art restorer named Cornelius Whitmore, who arrived at the scene of that crime, witnessed what he witnessed, and made a choice that cost him 40 years of his life. We will prove every claim I have just made. We will prove it with documents. We will prove it with photographs. We will prove it with the voice of Cornelius Whitmore himself, recorded in 1989. In anticipation of this exact day, the room had gone very still. "Mr. Buchanan," she said, "has presented contracts to this court. Contracts that he says were signed by Cornelius Whitmore in 1952. We have had those contracts examined by 3 independent forensic document examiners. The contracts reference paragraph 47 of the Pennsylvania Antiquities Trade Act, which I would like to enter into the record was not signed into law until 1964. The contracts cite a federal customs form by a number that was not assigned by the federal government until 1971. The contracts contain a notary's signature from a Mr. Henry Patterson of Hartford, Connecticut, who, according to public records, died in 1948. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The contracts, Your Honor, are forgeries. They are obvious forgeries. The Sterling family has had decades to prepare them, and they have prepared them anyway with the sloppiness of men who believed they would never be challenged." Buchanan was on his feet. The judge raised one hand. Buchanan sat back down. Vivian went on for an hour. She produced the original last will and testament of Edward Devereux, in which he left his entire collection to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She produced authentication from a handwriting expert. She produced the federal correspondence in which Thaddeus Sterling in 1952 had filed a competing will on behalf of distant relatives who, it turned out under examination, did not exist. She produced FBI memoranda from a 1974 investigation that had been opened and closed within 6 months with no explanation. She produced Beatrice Lockhart's phone records and the records of 3 reporters who had died in the years they had been investigating the Sterling family. She produced Edmund Hayes, who took the stand and authenticated 3 pieces from the collection, including the great painting by their known characteristics and their match to the pre-fire Devereux catalog photographs. She produced Teresa Bouchard, who corroborated him. She produced Beatrice Lockhart, who told the court in a voice that did not waver what her grandmother had said in the last phone call she had ever made. And then, at the beginning of the 3rd hour, Vivian Marsh stood up at her table and said, "Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence one final item." She lifted a small silver cassette recorder from the table. In 1989, she said Cornelius Whitmore made this recording. He did so by his own statement on the recording in anticipation that the truth he had carried might one day need to be told in his absence. He gave the recording sealed to his grandson in a letter found in October of this year. The grandson is here today. He is the defendant in this matter. The voice you are about to hear is the voice of a man who has been dead for nearly 30 years. I would like to play it now. Buchanan was on his feet. Objection, hearsay. The witness cannot be cross-examined. Judge Holloway tilted her head slightly. "Mr. Buchanan," she said, "your client has built his case on the alleged statements and signatures of the same dead man. You cannot have it both ways. Overruled. Counselor, you may play the tape." Vivian pressed the button. A small, clear voice came out of the recorder. The courtroom went absolutely silent. The voice spoke calmly and without hurry. It introduced itself. It gave a date and a place. It said the name Cornelius Whitmore, and the name Thaddeus Sterling, and the name Edward Devereaux, and the name Catherine Devereaux, and the names of all 11 of the staff who had died that night. It said the name Alice Hoffman Last. Beatrice Lockhart, 2 rows behind Theo, put both hands over her face. The voice told the story. It told it the way Theo's grandfather had told stories when Theo was 7. Walking back from the woods at dusk, patiently, without raising its volume. The voice described what Cornelius had seen when he had arrived at the smoking ruin 3 days after the fire. It described the basement and the man going through the vault and the conversation that had taken place there. It described the choice. It described the 3 weeks that followed the panel truck and the dark country roads and the house in Bedford County where the collection had come to rest. It described the FBI investigation and the journalists and what had happened to them. It described 40 years of waiting. At the end of the recording, after a small pause that you could hear, the voice said, "I broke the law. I removed property that was not mine. I did it to keep that property out of the hands of the men who had murdered for it. I accept the consequences of that choice. I would make it again. I have made it again every day of my life since, by not telling and by living long enough to leave this account in better hands than mine." The voice paused. To whoever is listening, I hope you are the one I think you are. I hope you have looked at the things in the room beneath my house and seen what I saw in them. I hope you understand that they do not belong to me, and they do not belong to you. They belong to the world. Give them back to it. The voice paused again. "This is Cornelius Whitmore," the voice said. "I am alive on the day I am making this recording. I do not know if I will be alive on the day it is played. Whoever you are, listen to me. Some things are worth more than money. Some things must be protected at all costs." The tape clicked off. The courtroom did not move. Theo could hear someone crying behind him. He did not turn to see who it was. He was looking at Howard Sterling III. The white-haired man had not moved during the playing of the tape. His handsome banker's face had gone the color of old paper. His mouth had come open slightly. He was looking not at Theo, not at Vivian, not at the judge, but at the empty space in the middle of the courtroom where his grandfather's victim had just spoken. 2 seats down, Roland Ashby was looking at the floor. Judge Holloway took her glasses off. She set them on the bench. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. She put the glasses back on. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "will you take the stand, please?" Theo stood up. He walked to the witness box. He sat down. The judge looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I'm going to ask you one question. You may take as much time as you need to answer." "Yes, ma'am." "If this court rules in your favor today, if this court accepts the evidence Ms. Marsh has presented and finds that the collection beneath your grandfather's house was acquired by him in the manner he describes on that recording, what is your intention regarding the disposition of that collection?" Theo did not need any time to answer. "I'm going to give it back, Your Honor," he said. There was a small movement in the courtroom. He went on. "Your Honor, I have spent the last 3 months trying to understand what my grandfather was. The world told me he was an art restorer. The Sterling family said he was a thief. The man on that tape says he was a witness. I don't know what to call him. I'll let history decide. But I do know what he wanted. He wanted what Edward Devereaux wanted. He wanted those things in a museum. He wanted my great-grandfather's name, and Catherine Devereux's name, and Alice Hoffman's name on a plaque where children could read it. He spent 40 years alone in a house, keeping his promise to a dead man. He died without ever getting to keep it himself. I want to keep it for him. He paused. Your Honor, he said. I lost my wife in October. I lost my house. I lost most of the people I thought I could count on. I am not telling you this for pity. I am telling you because you asked me what I want to do with $500 million. And I want to be honest with you about why I am not going to keep a single dollar of it. I have lost enough things that I know what is worth keeping. Money is not on the list. My daughter is on the list. My self-respect is on the list. My grandfather's memory is on the list. I am giving the collection to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I am asking only that they hang a plaque next to it with 13 names on it. That is my intention, Your Honor. That is all. He stopped. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Holloway looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore, she said. You may step down. She did not call a recess. She did not consult any books. She gathered her papers in front of her. She looked at the courtroom over the top of her glasses. I have heard enough, she said. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. The documents presented by the plaintiff are forgeries, and I will be referring this matter and the underlying evidence concerning the 1952 fire to the Attorney General of the State of Connecticut and to the appropriate federal authorities. The collection in question is the lawful property of the estate of Cornelius Whitmore, held in custodianship by Theodore Whitmore, who has stated his intention to convey it to a public institution in accordance with the wishes of the original Devereux estate. This court will assist in the orderly facilitation of that transfer. She raised her gavel. She paused. She looked once at Howard Sterling III. Mr. Sterling, she said, you will not enjoy the months ahead. The gavel came down. 8 months later, on a warm Tuesday evening in September, Theo stood at the top of the wide stone steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. He was wearing a new suit. Adelaide had insisted. She had picked it out herself. She stood beside him now in a blue dress, with her hair up 25 years old, looking in this light on these steps, exactly like the photograph of her mother that hung on the wall of the house in Bedford County. The new wing was called the Cornelius Whitmore Gallery. The wing inside it was called the Devereux Hall. The plaque at the entrance bore 13 names. Alice Hoffman was the last of them by Beatrice Lockhart's request, so that visitors would not skim past her on their way to the more famous dead. Howard Sterling III was awaiting trial in federal court for insurance fraud conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The criminal case for the 1952 murders was being built more slowly, but a federal task force had been assembled, and the smart money in the press was on indictments by the spring. The Sterling commercial real estate empire had collapsed. 3 of his cousins had cut deals with prosecutors. The newspapers had taken to calling it the longest case of arson and murder ever solved in American history. Roland Ashby had divorced his wife 6 weeks after the hearing, or rather, his wife had divorced him. Prudence Ashby had moved into a small apartment in Pittsburgh and had written Theo a single letter that he had read once and put away in a drawer he did not open often. The letter had said, "You were right about him. I am sorry I was not braver sooner. I do not expect you to forgive me." Adelaide had asked when she found the letter. Theo had said that is between her and you. He had meant it. Inside the museum in the Central Hall, the great painting from his grandfather's vault hung on a wall painted the deep green of old library walls. It had been cleaned and lit by people who knew what they were doing. The men at the table looked up. The gold sky burned. The doorway opened onto the distant city. Theo had been told by the curator that on weekdays, 100 people stood in front of it for the whole of their visit, and then went home. Dorothy Ashcroft had come to the opening. She was 91 years old and in a wheelchair. She had been Catherine Devereaux's personal secretary, one of the few people who had not been in the house the night of the fire, because she had been visiting her own mother in Boston. She had spent the years since believing she was the last person alive who remembered the collection. She had taken Theo's hand in both of hers when they were introduced and had said, "Young man, young man, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." He had not known what to do with the fourth thank you. He had knelt beside her chair and let her hold on as long as she needed. The speeches had gone the way speeches go. The director of the museum had spoken. The chairman of the board had spoken. Beatrice Lockhart had spoken. And she had been the best of them, a teacher to her bones, no notes, no flourishes, just the story of a 16-year-old girl who had refused to leave the family she worked for and had paid for that loyalty with her life. Then they had called Theo to the podium. He had not written anything down. He had thought about writing something down. He had decided not to. He came to the podium with his hands in his jacket pockets and he looked out at the room. "My grandfather was not a hero when this started," he said. He paused. He was an art restorer. He had soft hands and a quiet voice. He was a man who, by his own account, walked into a basement in Connecticut in 1952 to do a job and saw something he was not supposed to see, and made a choice that any of us in this room would have prayed not to have to make. He chose to live in the room with the man who had killed 13 people by pretending he had not seen what he had seen. And then when he was outside again, when he was alive, he made another choice. He could have gone home and forgotten. He could have called the police. He could have done 100 things. What he did instead was come back. 3 weeks. In the dark. With a panel truck. He carried a great deal of human history out of a basement in Connecticut and into a vault he built with his own hands under a house in Pennsylvania. And then he kept it for 40 years. He paused again. He paid for that. He paid for it in loneliness. He paid for it in a wife who died early. He paid for it in a son who never understood him, and a grandson who didn't either until this year. He never sold a single piece. He never benefited by a single dollar. He just kept his promise to a dead man. Theo looked down at the podium. "I have learned something this year that I did not know before. I lost my wife in October. I have not gone an hour of any day since without thinking about her. I have spent most of the past year so angry at the world I could not draw a clean breath. And then I went down a set of stone steps in my grandfather's basement, and I came back up understanding something he had been trying to tell me my whole life, and I was too young to hear." He raised his eyes. "Some things are worth more than money," he said. "Some things have to be protected at all costs. My grandfather knew that. My wife knew that. Alice Hoffman knew that at 16 years old, on the night she chose not to take the train home. The men who killed her did not know it. They never have. And the courts will deal with them. But the rest of us, you and me, the people in this room, the people who will walk through this gallery in the years to come, we have a job. The job is to be the kind of people Alice was, to choose not to take the train home, to stand for the people we love, to protect the things that matter, to know which things those are." He paused one more time. "That is what my grandfather left me," he said. "That is the inheritance. The rest of it, the paintings, the bronzes, the manuscripts, the $500 million, that was the easy part. He had already given me the hard part by the time I was 7 years old. I was just too young to understand. He stepped back from the podium. The room rose to its feet. Adelaide came up onto the small dais and put her arms around him. She was crying. He realized after a moment that he was too. He had not done so in public since the funeral. He let it happen. The applause went on a long time. Later on the museum steps, when the crowd had thinned and the city had gone purple with dusk, Theo and Adelaide stood for a long time looking out at the avenue. She slid her arm through his. "You think Mom would be proud of you?" she said. Theo thought about it. "I think she'd say I was a slow learner," he said. Adelaide laughed. It was the laugh she had not used in over a year. It was Eleanor's laugh. "I think she'd say you finally got there," she said. They went down the steps together. In the country, the next morning, a black dog named Augustus would wait at the screen door of a house in Bedford County for two people he loved to come home. They would come home that afternoon. The dog would press his gray muzzle into Theo's hand. Adelaide would put the kettle on. The leaves in the yard would turn the color of the gold sky in the great painting they had left behind. And the wind would move against the boards of an old house that no longer had any secrets under its floor. Only a man and his daughter, and a dog, and a future they were finally allowed to have. Some things are worth more than money. Some things must be protected at all costs. Cornelius Whitmore had been right all along. And Theodore Whitmore, at 47 years old, on a porch in Pennsylvania with his daughter at his side, and a wife in his memory, and a grandfather's hand still somehow resting on his shoulder, had finally learned the lesson.